Commission Ministries presents.
And now,
we present to you
Listen Radio, amplifying the voice of God to all people, hearing the cry of the lost, broken and discouraged. Listen as a roundtable discussion panel covering various topics within the body of Christ with your host, Pastor Banbury, co-hosts, Minister LaTonya Henry and Rhonda Nixon. This is Listen Radio, using the airwaves as a loudspeaker to amplify the Word of God. Word of God.
God Jesus.
Ooh, all right. This is exciting.
Hey,
Okay.
it is exciting.
It is, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
So, welcome back to those of you who have listened to Listen Radio before. It's been a long time since we've actually come together and done the show. But this is just the season where God said, okay, it's time for you guys to revive Listen Radio. And what better time now than in this season? And so we're trying new technology and new methods, just like everybody else. So welcome Listen Radio listeners. Today's topic, we're not going to take a lot of time introducing the topic, but today we're going to be talking about the elephant in the room, which is COVID-19, the coronavirus, and all of the myriad things and circumstances that have evolved from having to deal with this pandemic. I don't think that there is anything in our society and in our culture that has not been touched or affected by this worldwide, or that's actually kind of redundant, by the pandemic. Pan means global, world. Okay. So that there's not been anything that hasn't been affected by the pandemic. So we wanted to take this show to kind of address some of those topics and have a discussion, because we know y'all are talking about it. I mean, I can't hardly go through a day or a week without talking about it with my family. And when my kids call me from out of town, we wind up talking about it. We have to say, girl, let's not do this. Nope. We're not going to do this. I've stopped listening to the news every single day because you get the same thing over and over again. So, but what we want to do is provide some insights, talk about some of the things that we know you guys are talking about. But more than that, we want to provide a biblical perspective. We want to share some wisdom with y'all that we believe that would be the church would be benefited by, and see if we can't emerge from this crisis stronger, better, and wiser. Shout out to Marvin Sapp.
Yeah.
Yes.
We got LaTonya shouting in the background over there.
Yeah, I know. Right. Yeah. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just gonna kind of do a recap. You know, and I feel like I'm on ESPN now because I feel like I'm in the little sports boxes, you know, Stephen A. Smith and, you know, all of them other people. But anyway, we're going to turn it over to LaTonya and she's going to kind of take us through a recap of how we got here. Like, why are we here? What happened?
Yeah.
Why are we here?
Wow. Okay. I don't think people have forgotten, but in January is when I think COVID-19 really started getting on people's radar, that things were out of control in China with infections and things of that nature. Because that's when I started kind of paying attention to it, and I was like, ooh, disease, okay. So by February, we had grown very, very concerned and started having some cases in the United States. By March is when, with where I work, you were planning to go to South by Southwest EDU conference. And I remember in early March, just, you know, talking to my team lead, and it's like, you think they're going to cancel this thing? And she was like, for this? No. I was like, okay, you say so. I'm going to keep getting ready for this conference. And then the day before the conference, and we had shirts printed up and everything.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
they tell us shutting it down, it's closed. And
Wow.
then people started like looking like, what, for real? For real though? So by spring break, because that was right before spring break, by spring break, I was at my office doing remote agreements for my team members who were not even in the office. So they started extending spring breaks. So it went from 1 week to 2 weeks. And then they pushed it out to middle of April, we'll come back. And then they said, no, we're not going to come back.
No.
We doing everything online.
Yes.
And from there, we were just kind of in our lockdown mode, limiting our interactions. And if you were at the grocery store, you remember, all of a sudden, you couldn't get to the grocery store without standing in a line and going through procedures.
Yes.
And they kept changing that every day. Like, oh, okay, let's try it this way. And now here we are in May, needing to come out. And in the meantime, people are losing income, unemployment just kind of exploded. People still couldn't get benefits. And all of our children were homeschooling. So all of these families who never prepared to homeschool their children, having to deal with that kind of dynamic, as well as still feed kids and still try to get to work. Also remember that the school districts started doing curbside meal pickup. And then they had to do some parameters on that because everybody, I guess, and their dog was trying to get curbside pickup.
Yes, and in Central Texas, that's a reality. Everybody and their dog, because people just love their dogs.
Yes. So now here we are with protests breaking out. People really upset about the fact that there's been this shutdown and loss of income. And on my spectrum in higher education, there are, students really concerned about paying what they've had to pay for an experience they didn't get. And we have churches now thrown into the mix of opening up and, the controversy behind that. So now I would say we went from, shock and awe to, okay, we're all hunkered down, to now as a lot of people are on the spectrum of saying, this whole thing's been ridiculous. It's been contrived. We've been bamboozled. This is ridiculous. So yeah, that's where we are.
So thank you for the recap, because, we have such a short-term memory that I even forgot at the very beginning, the first day that I went to HEB, and I called myself getting up, going to the store, in the middle of the day like I normally would around 1 o'clock, only to drive up and see a line of people. And I was like, okay, Lord, we are truly in the apocalypse. And I say that and I laugh out loud. I say it out loud and I laugh because I'm like, girl, you have to stand in a line at the grocery store. There are some places where there is no such thing, But for us, that was kind of a wake-up call. And then I said, I'm going to get up early and go the next day, like at 8 o'clock. And there was still a line, and I almost got into a fight with somebody because they wouldn't stand 6 feet from me. I'm just joking. Not really. But, so it's like there's this tension in the air, about people keeping their distance. And it's like that happened, very early on in the beginning. And, oh, you forgot to mention the toilet paper, scandal. And everybody was hoarding toilet paper.
I still haven't come across anything that has given any explanation as to why or how that got started, because it was so ridiculous to me that I was like, okay, let me see if I can find something that gives, an explanation to it. I haven't come across anything. I was just curious how because there was never a shortage. It didn't become a shortage until everybody started hoarding it, which is kind of, what happens, just about every time in situations like
Yeah.
this as well. It's just, it's
Well,
not, there's an actual shortage, just, the result of people going crazy and hoarding it. So.
Right.
and we've already done that in recent times with gas.
We did it with
Yes.
gas.
We created
The-
a gas
say that.
shortage.
Yes.
The hurricane that
And
came through Houston.
yeah. So, and that stuff at the grocery store, ladies, I continue keep my eye on all the different things that are disappearing. It's like it was and my lens is definitely tinted because I have kidney disease and I deal with healthcare and cleanliness and things like that. So it was like we went from not having toilet paper, not a big deal for somebody like me with kidney disease. I don't need that much toilet paper, so I didn't need to hoard that. But it's like that started disappearing. Then they took all the meat off the shelf. Okay, I'm impacted. I need protein on a regular basis.
Right.
For health reasons. It took all the meat. People bought all the meat. They bought all the rice. They bought all of the pasta. They bought all the mayonnaise, all the bread, all the
They
paper
bought up some of everything.
towels.
Girl, no beans.
Yes, all the alcohol, as in topical alcohol for disinfecting. All the disinfecting products. If it said it killed a germ, they bought it.
Yeah, no bleach. We still don't have that much bleach on the shelves anymore.
Right. Or Lysol.
No.
Or Lysol. Girl, forget it. There's no cleaning agents.
Yeah.
Forget it.
No. And recently, I've noticed they took all the vitamin D. They bought all the HEB vitamin D.
Wow.
You can't find stuff to do your nails. They done bought the files, the emery boards.
Because you can't go to the nail salon.
Yes.
Oh, yes, that.
Yes.
But also, we're going to talk about, I think we're going to talk about the food shortage or whatever later on. But some of that might also be the result of the products, not.
Yeah, they can't get them.
They can't get them to the grocery stores and that sort of thing because of everything that's going on. So they're not actually getting the merchandise. They're not having a way of getting the merchandise to the stores. So that's why it's also it's appearing to be a shortage in it when it's actually just the whole logistics part.
Yeah, the food supply chain has been disrupted, so because everything has been disrupted and people are out of work and working less, and we know that the Truckers Association, I don't know what it's called, I'm just making the name up, but the Truckers Association was protesting President Trump at a recent press conference about a week or two ago, and he was like, they love me. You hear them honking in the backgrounds because they love me, and they're like, no, we're protesting, we're angry. So the food supply chain has been disrupted because the trucking supply lines have been disrupted, and the fact that because the food supply chain has been disrupted, I saw videos of milk companies having to pour out thousands of gallons of milk.
Yes,
I've read articles about agricultural and meat places having to gas their animals and put them to sleep because they're not selling enough. So it's really, really a mess. And so, one of the things that I said just a moment ago, that it's like we have such a short-term memory, and I'm amazed at how people are responding to this pandemic. And people are saying that, we've never had to do this before. We've never had to shut down the government before. We've never had to shut down stores. We've never had to do this before. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at the worst pandemic in world history, which is the Spanish flu, or the pandemic of 1918. So I'm going to try something. I'm going to try to share my screen. So y'all just be patient with me. So let me see. Let me try to share my screen real quick. Boom. Okay. All right. Can y'all still see me, or do you actually see what I'm sharing?
We see your screen. We see
you see my screen. Awesome.
The article.
Okay. Yes. Okay, cool. All right, so this is about the history of the 1918 flu. And as you can see, it's from the cdc.gov website. So, of course, the flu lasted from 1918 to 1919. Some people say that it really kind of extended into 1920, but those were the years or the time frame that it was at its height. It was caused by an H1N1 virus with genes of avian origin, which I thought that was interesting, and I highlighted that because when we hear about the avian flu and or the virus avian flu and H1N1, we in recent history are like, what is that? You know, we think it's new, but it's actually not. Okay, so it is estimated that about 500 million people, or 1/3 of the world's population, became infected with the virus, and the number of deaths was estimated to be at least 50 million worldwide, with about 675 occurring in the United States. And so I noted that about 10% of the world's population actually died, and less than 1% of the United States population died from the actual virus. Okay. So, but here's the thing that I thought was interesting in terms of how people are responding to the virus and saying that we're living in unprecedented times. Now, mind you, when you look at the numbers, and I couldn't really see projections that would take us to the levels of the 1918 flu pandemic. So, of course, we haven't reached those levels, but we're talking about an extended period of time for between 2 and 3 years that this pandemic lasted. One of the things that I thought was interesting is that there was no vaccine for the 1918
Right.
flu, just like there's no vaccine now. Um, there's no antibiotics to treat the secondary bacterial infections that can be associated with influenza. So they had to use non-pharmaceutical interventions, such as isolation,
Mm-hmm.
quarantine,
Mm-hmm.
good personal hygiene, wash your nasty hands, disinfectants, and limitations of public gatherings, which were applied unevenly.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about what we're doing now, we act as if this has never happened before, but it actually has. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen for right now. But the fact that we can go back in history just a short amount of time ago and see that there is evidence that we've had to do this before, it gives credence to the expression that it's like history repeats itself.
Yeah.
It repeats itself. You know, we are destined and doomed to failure if we don't remember history.
Mm-hmm.
And so people are acting brand new because they're saying we've never had to do this before. But if you go on that website, and we'll leave a link in the description box for the YouTube channel when we post it there, and we'll post links on Facebook when we post it there. But if you go on that website and you take the time to look at some of the photo galleries, I saw barbers and customers sitting in chairs with masks on. I saw people having court proceedings outside
Right.
because, you know, one of the things that they believe that being in a closed space was more dangerous than being in an open air space. So they were having police hearings, court hearings outside. You saw people going to work, walking down the street with masks on. So we've had to do this before.
You know what I thought was interesting too?
What's
There
that?
on that same article, I looked at it as well, and they were recruiting nurses and healthcare professionals just like they're doing now. You know how they asked them to if they were retired, if they had any medical history. I think the governor here in Texas was excusing the rules that are normally in place for healthcare professionals. You know, they're supposed to have to stay up on what we call continued education every year, continuing education hours every year. And if they haven't done so, then normally they're no longer licensed to practice. But they excused all of that. They were recruiting healthcare professionals, pretty much exactly the same things that they're doing now. That's also what they did back with the Spanish flu in 2018.
Yeah, 1918. Yeah, excellent.
Oh, it says 2018.
Exactly. Yeah, no problem. Exactly. So here's another thing. I'm going to share my screen one more time, and I want to share with y'all something. Let's see, where is it at? It's right here. Okay. All right. So we talked about non-pharmaceutical interventions and the idea that people are protesting some of these interventions, and they're saying that we've never had to do this before, we shouldn't have to do it, you're infringing on my rights, and so on and so forth. So here's some evidence. I know we live in a post-evidence, post-factual culture where people really don't listen to facts and figures, but that's neither here nor there. That's a whole different topic for a different time to discuss. But we have to look at some of the things that we've experienced before and what we've gone through before. And so the National Geographic posted an article called or entitled "How Some Cities Flattened the Curve During the 1918 Flu Pandemic." And so because we know there was no vaccine, people had to use these different methods: hand washing, quarantine, social isolation, social distancing, and disinfecting in order to flatten the curve. So here's a chart. So it says that Philadelphia, the city of Philadelphia, waited 8 days after their death rate began to take off before planning gatherings or banning gatherings and closing schools. So they've done this before. They endured the highest peak death rate of all cities studied. So we look at San Francisco, and it says, after relaxing social distancing measures, San Francisco faced a long second wave of deaths. So this is where we are now. We're barely 2 months in or 3 months into this pandemic here in the United States. We already have states and cities loosening and relaxing social distancing measures. And we're seeing that this happened before. And San Francisco faced a long wave of second deaths after relaxing these measures. New York City began quarantine measures very early, 11 days before the death rate spiked. The city had the lowest death rate on the eastern seaboard.
That's not the case now.
Not the case now. You know, St. Louis had strong social distancing measures and a low total death rate. The city successfully delayed its peak in deaths, but faced a sharp increase when restrictions were temporarily relaxed. And so we go to this little graph here, and it shows you cities that ordered social distancing measures later and for shorter periods tended to have spikes in death and higher overall death rates. So the highest death rate after 24 weeks. So you see these cities had high death rates, deaths per 100,000 after 24 weeks of the pandemic. And so the list goes a little bit further on. But then you go down here and you see cities that ordered social distancing measures sooner and for longer periods usually slowed infections and lowered overall death rates. So we see the stark contrast in the death rates between the cities that implemented and continued social distancing measures compared to the ones that did not, or they shortened. So like I said, you know, we've done this before, we've been here before, and there's evidence that proves that these measures can help to slow the spread and to have fewer deaths in all. But people are storming their state's capital. We have President Trump inviting and inciting riots and protests and things of that nature. And people just will not look at the evidence, and they won't look at history. But even though that is the case, we want to now talk about, well, what are the concerns? What are the reasons why now people are refusing to accept the evidence? People don't remember, why people don't trust that these things are in their and the public's best interest. What is the problem? Why are we tripping? Why are we going crazy? So this is what we want to talk about now. What are the growing concerns? I mean, besides the obvious, which is the COVID-19, the coronavirus, that's the obvious. But besides the obvious, there seem to be things that people are actually more concerned and more afraid of than the virus itself. So what are some other concerns?
Well, one thing that comes to my mind is the fact that, you know, the United States is a capitalist country. You know, our country thrives on making money. That's what, you know, that's the world, that's the country we live in. So I think one of the biggest arguments has been the fact of, how bad the economy is right now because of the result of social distancing and us being sheltered in, right? That's no secret as well. So when I've watched some of the protesting, which I'm like you, Pastor Jay, I've just kind of unplugged from a lot of this now. It's so much information that we're being bombarded with every day that it's really kind of hard to tell what's factual and what's fiction and that sort of thing anyway. So I'm like you, I'll watch it every so often and then I leave it alone. But from what I did see with the protests, what I did listen to was a lot of them are protesting because they feel like they need to get back to work and they're not being able to make money in order, to I won't say survive necessarily, but in order, to keep themselves afloat and that sort of thing. And I don't know if anyone is saying that they don't think the virus is serious, but they are saying that they think that if people take the proper precautions, then they should be able to still get out and do what they need to do every day and stay safe. But I think that your graph that you just showed proves that to be not the case. I think that, as you said, history has proven those that waited later to put those instances in place, and then those who opened up sooner, you saw the second wave, you saw the higher spike in deaths and that sort of thing. So the people that are protesting for whatever the reason it is, in my opinion, and this is subjective, my opinion, I think that it's going to be more harm for us than it's going to be good in the long run. And it depends on what's important to you.
Mm-hmm.
Is money important to you, or are lives important to you? And that's my opinion on that protesting thing. Those are the two things that's being weighed. Is it about making money, or is it about us protecting the citizens from, eventually becoming a statistic of COVID?
And unfortunately, the fact that we are really in this dichotomy of either it's your life and your health or it's making money, they've made those two things mutually exclusive because of the fact that, we're all in debt. America's in debt, and we live in debt as American citizens, and we live from paycheck to paycheck. So there is no room to be concerned about both and make both work, to be both concerned about the lives of individuals and the country and the health of the nation, and to also protect its citizens. Those things have become mutually exclusive. So it's an either or dichotomy that we're living in this reality.
And I was going to say, it when you boil it down to human survival behavior, it's a pick your poison kind of option. So yes, COVID-19 causes death, but so does starvation. So when people are faced with the option of, do I go out there and confront a disease that I can't see and try to take precautions because I need to be able to eat, I need to be able to have shelter. What if you were working in one of those jobs that experienced all these layoffs? It is so complicated for people to get healthcare insurance that they rely on insurance through their company. So we're talking about a lot of different factors being jeopardized if you can't go to work.
Yes.
And that is just compounded, as Pastor Jay said, about the level of debt. So if you don't have any savings, then you can't float any amount of time before you're in trouble. You are going to lose everything. And we're also talking about a country that has gone through not only the Spanish flu, but also the Great Depression. There are lots of comparisons to what we're dealing with now being like the Great Depression. And I recently watched a documentary on YouTube about the Great Depression, and it really didn't cross my mind that there were people who still had their jobs. There are people who were still working because they worked for other people with wealth, who able to manage their finances and didn't leverage themselves in a bunch of debt so they could still pay their employees. So there were people who were still working through the Great Depression, but there were a lot of people who were out of work and they were homeless and they were starving. And that is what people don't want to do. Like Rhonda said, you know, we are a capitalist society. We don't want to lose our things, you know, so that is the choice that people are, you know, that they're facing. The other thing that I would say about this in terms of making money, if we talk about the Great Depression, our country was still a country that made stuff, you know, so now we're a country that provides services. So we provide services, and most of our prosperity is because we spend so much money. So if you can't provide the service and you can't spend the money, then we don't have any prosperity. You know, so that's
and we don't have a healthy economy.
Right.
And you know,
we don't have a healthy economy.
Yeah, and you know, another twist to put on it too, and I won't necessarily say this for the protesting, but I will say that, you know, naturally, a lot of people are also wanting things to open back up simply so they can start feeling like we're back in our norm, you know, because they want to start feeling like we're back to the way things were. You know, they're not feeling like it kind of, you know, with things opening back up, people starting to be able to kind of get back to their normal routines. It reduces some of that anxiety, you know, that a lot of people have been dealing with since COVID started. And if you think about it, that's a natural response. You know, I think most was wanting to get that feeling of getting back to the way things were. You know, and that's another reason why. And like I said, I don't want to put that along with the protesters, although that could be maybe what some of them were also dealing with as well. But for the most part, though, I think, you know, that's another reason why so many people are so anxious and in agreement with them opening up things so soon, because it does, you know, it allows, you know, you to get back to what, you know, you're used to doing, makes you feel comfortable again, you know, that sort of thing.
So basically, the long story short is that it's not just the virus. It is the effect that it has had on an already weakened economy. It is the fact that our economy is based not on gold or backed by anything, or the fact that we don't make anything. We're not huge in exports, but we are an economy that is service-based. And so now there are no goods and services, so there's no economy. And the anxiety that people are feeling, and the inability to be able to handle, you know, circumstances in a crisis. And unfortunately, we don't have leadership that is giving us a level of confidence that we can and we will make it through. So we have all of these different issues. Now, the protesters, I agree about the fact that people are feeling anxious, because I have to admit that there have been times that it's like, oh, okay, you know, and it's definitely sent me into my prayer closet. For those of us who are believers and we pray, it definitely made us pray more. It made us listen to God more. It kept us on our knees more. But for those who don't necessarily have that outlet, you know, there's really no other place to go to feel that release and a sense of peace about what's happening in the midst of this chaos. But some of these protesters, these people showing up with guns, you know, these people that are being threatening, people that are acting at levels of what I would consider to be national terrorism, you know, acting in a way that's terroristic, threatening government officials. I mean, that's an act of terrorism, to just even threaten a government official or to show up in a government building. I'm like, I'm sorry, but you was just waiting on an opportunity to act crazy. You know, because what is showing up at your governor's mansion going to do to help the economy with a gun? What do you think she's going to do? Go out there and tell you and take you to a restaurant and give you a job? I mean, that ain't got nothing to do with
Tell me
nothing.
which governor you're referring to.
I think it was in Michigan, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, the lady in Michigan. You know, so, you know, and there have been numerous protests across the country where people have showed up with guns, but Michigan is the one that is the most, you know, recognizable and most visible. And I just have to question the reason for doing that, because then what would then be the results? If you're going to protest, then you're trying to voice your opinion, which protests don't really change anything. Really, it's policy and government legislation that changes things. So protest really just brings awareness, but you want there to be an end result. So it's like, what is bringing a gun to the governor going to do? But you were going to say something, and then we're going to move on, because we wanted to talk about some of the list of concerns that we think people have, and health disparities that have been highlighted in the midst of this pandemic is definitely one of them.
Yeah, all I was going to say was, that kind of action, showing up with the guns and that sort of thing. To me, that's a total different topic, than what we're talking about. But that's the thing, of just kind of, trying to flaunt around what you think is your power, and trying to flaunt around, you're not going to take my freedom from me, and you're not going to take my rights from me. And so I think that's more along the lines of what that's supposed to be doing, with some underlying prejudice and just an opportunity of bigotry, just an opportunity to be able to get some of that internal aggression out, because you think that you could somewhat maybe get away with that at this time. And just as you mentioned, what do you think the result of that was going to be? You know what the result's going to be before you do it. But because some people in our country have more of a privilege to act certain ways than others, that was an opportunity for them to do that. And as we see, what the result of it was. Now, if that had been particularly other people in other areas doing that, I don't think the result would have been what that one was there in Michigan.
Oh, no, absolutely not. So another issue, besides the economic impact that it's had on our nation, and I believe that we're going to see echoes of this, or ripples of this, continue to see, some people have posited that the economy was already in trouble before the pandemic hit, but now that the virus is just kind of a scapegoat for the economy that was already having difficulty. But now what we're starting to see with the pandemic is that our country has, because we're a capitalistic society, everything is for sale, including healthcare. And so there have always been health disparities in our country. There have always been, the inequality that we see at the level of healthcare, that people of color have less access to healthcare and less quality of care when they do encounter the medical industry, that the quality of care tends to be diminished as compared to, our white counterparts. And we're starting to see that, or we have seen that now showing up and being very visible with the pandemic. So Rhonda, did you want to, expound on that just a little bit more?
Yeah, so basically I was on the CDC website as well, looking up the disparities that's happening related to COVID. And I'm sure many have been hearing how it seems to be affecting African Americans more. It's impacting people of color more than it is other races. And just as you were saying, the article that I was reading, and I was trying to share my screen as well, but I'm not seeing to be able to do that. So I'm not gonna, I'll have to check on that later. But anyway, so it's basically just giving some statistics too, and some data showing how it is affecting the African American society and the other people of color. It's also mentioning the Latinos and Hispanics, how they're being affected. And I think, instead of just going and reading the article, it's what's happening is, although there might be a lower number of African Americans in a certain state, they're finding that even with there being a lower number of African Americans, the numbers are higher of African Americans that are coming to the hospital or getting the disease, and then the numbers are really much higher on the actual deaths. And what this is doing is it's bringing to light these disparities that have been happening all along, but it's bringing it more, it's getting more attention now because, it's in the forefront. It's what everybody is talking about. So they're not necessarily being able, and I'm not going to say push it under the rug. I don't know if that's, actually what's being done. Some would say that that's exactly what it is, but it's just showing proof, the fact of, African Americans not having access to proper health care, African Americans and their living conditions, the segregation that still takes place in a lot of these major cities, you know, New York, Chicago, you know, Houston area, all of these cities that are being hit and most impactful by COVID, you're seeing those
Chicago.
disparities, Chicago, all of that. And it's just saying, you know, the living conditions, how densely populated our areas are. And one scripture that came to my mind was the scripture, I think it's Hosea, and it says that my people perish due to lack of knowledge. And so I thought about that, you know, when I was reading this about the different reasons as to why people, the African American culture is suffering more. And it's because they really aren't getting the same information about the disease as well, because they're in certain communities that you don't have certain leaders, you don't have certain organizations and stuff going into those communities, giving them the knowledge that they need to know about the disease. The article on the CDC article is saying that they're not having access to internet like most of us do, you know, to be able to keep up with what they're suggesting that you should do. You know, they're not knowing to do social distancing. They're hearing it, but because they're not getting a clear understanding of how serious the disease is, because of where they're living, because of lack of knowledge, because of low, because of them not having access to proper health care, because of them living in socio-low economic communities, that's why they're being affected more. And then I read an article also, and I was looking for the article so I could give you guys the actual information of it, but it was talking about the whole prejudice factor that people deal with in the healthcare with African Americans and Hispanic and Latinos compared to white. You have more
Racial.
racial, you have more white people that are working in the hospitals, that are the nurses and the doctors and that sort of thing. And so the article was talking about how you're also dealing with that, as well as to why you're seeing more in the African American culture and more of the Hispanic culture suffering because of the disease.
Well, absolutely. And, you know, the prejudice and the bias happens at the individual level, but, you know, what we're seeing is racial. It's race is at the macro level. It's a construct that's embedded within the medical field, within the medical industry, and within the education system, and within, you know, many different other structures. It's completely embedded, and the racism is what is attached and associated to the power to discriminate.
Right.
You know,
And
it's one thing to be prejudiced, and that's a, you know, we all have our own personal bias and
right.
prejudice, but the power to discriminate at the macro level, that is the definition of what racism is,
Right.
which is why people say, well, people of color can't be racist, but you can be prejudiced. You can discriminate, you can have bias, but the power to do it at the macro level, where the medical system just can completely overlook populations and deny access through low socioeconomic status. So it puts you in a track that if you don't have access to education, then you can't be upwardly mobile. If you can't be upwardly mobile, then you can't increase your life chances through economics and through education. And if you can't do that, then you're not going to be able to, you know, achieve a certain level where you can have access to healthcare. And then even when you, all those things being equal, all things being equal, we have the same level of education, we have the same income, we're in the same class. Two people, one black, one white, can walk into the doctor's office and receive an entirely different level of treatment.
Yes.
Where you see black people being turned away and denied testing and going home and dying.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
and that is the power to discriminate, you know, at the macro level, at the racial level. And there's an outcry about it in the Black community, but there's nothing that seems to be really done about it, because this is something, like you said, that has been in place. The health disparities have existed, you know, for a very long time, since the foundation of our country.
Right.
And COVID-19 is just one more layer that demonstrates that. But you look like you're trying to say something.
Also along with the other reasons for the minorities being affected more is the working conditions. I mean, in the working circumstances, we tend to have positions that are considered essential working positions. You know, we're the ones that send to work in certain areas. That's another reason why the critical worker positions is what they kind of called it on this CDC article, as
Mhm.
well as they're not given the option of paid sick leave. So they aren't being able to make the option, do I go to work or do I not go to work and not still get paid? So that's another reason they're being more susceptible to getting infected, because they're having to go to work because of, just like we've been saying, they don't have access to pay sick leave. They don't have health care unless they go to work, those type of things. And then, of course, the most obvious topic that's being, I want to say, promoted the most when certain people are being asked why this is happening to African Americans and Hispanic and Latinos, to kind of detour away from the fact, that we have the racial issues, and we have the fact that African Americans have always not been given the same treatment as other races and that sort of thing. And I say being focused on, because this doesn't make particular people, it doesn't put them in a hot seat as much. And that's the underlying conditions that they're saying that African Americans tend to have. And if y'all remember, I know I noticed it right off the bat, that that was the first response you started hearing government officials and things give when they were asking, well, why are African Americans being affected more? Why are the Hispanic and Latino people of color being affected more? And that was the perfect answer. Put it back on us.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
You're
y'all need to
obese,
stop
you have
drinking and stop.
diabetes.
You need to stop smoking cigarettes.
Put it back on us. Don't take any responsibility for the fact of the other things we just discussed, because African Americans are segregated, because African Americans don't get the same amount of health care, because African Americans don't get the same pay, and it's a whole power thing within our country. So put it back on them and say it's because they have high blood pressure and they deal with diabetes and they, deal with obesity. And although that might be the case, we all know that that is not the main reason why this is being the case as to why this is happening. It's the examples that you just gave, Pastor Jay. It's a ripple effect. Because obesity, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, heart disease, all of that is the result of us not getting the same health care, the same treatment when we go to the doctors, instead of us being
the same level of education, the same income, the same jobs.
All of that. Yeah. It's a ripple effect. But again, that was the first thing you heard them saying.
And it was from was it the Surgeon General? Was it that who said it?
No, the first person I heard say it was the president. But
I never heard him say it. I heard, I don't put it past him. But I thought that it was, and I will have to go back and fact check, but I thought it was the Surgeon General, and he was a black man that got up at a press conference and made that statement, and we were like, you are canceled.
Right.
We're done. Right. We're done with you.
Right. Yes. And because, like I said, and people in certain positions are puppets. And so, that's a puppetry move,
But, because they're embedded within the system. It's like, if you want to get to the highest levels of achievement within the system, then you have to placate to the system. You are just one peg, and you have to kowtow and bow to the system. So you are part of an institutionalized system of racism. Right. And I don't mean to cut you off, but we could do another show about inequality.
Yes.
And we could keep going. So we got to keep it moving, because we got some other things to.
But those are some of the reasons as to what is being said, why it's affecting the disparities with African Americans and Hispanics and Latinos.
Okay, so other concerns. Are y'all gonna get the vaccine? Silence.
I'm kind of like the brother in Africa. Y'all ain't fixing to make me your guinea pig. You never say never. You never say never.
Right.
Really, that's kind of a hard question for me to answer, because I would like to have the security or the relief or the trust in the fact of them coming out with a vaccine and people being able to be vaccinated against this, and then it kind of takes away some of the worry. I would like to be able to say, oh, yes, automatically. I would get the vaccine. I can't say that after there's been more testing on the vaccine and they've had, time to collect some data and that sort of thing. I can't say I wouldn't ever get the vaccine, but am I concerned about getting the vaccine right when it's available, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are
sure.
concerned. And, unfortunately, the culture that we're in right now is where people don't trust vaccines and they don't
Mhm.
trust the government and they don't trust. I mean, like you said, there were statements that were captured by two French, I don't know if they were virologists or physicians or epidemiologists, but they were captured on camera having said, well, we're going to go to Africa and we're going to test people. So that doesn't make me feel comfortable, especially considering that those of us in the African American community, know that we have been test subjects and guinea pigs, to, let us die of syphilis, you
Right.
know.
Right.
So, and I mean, they would literally, do unnecessary operations on Black women, and looking at their reproductive organs and
Yep.
take reproductive organs away, and do all kinds of horrible science fiction level atrocities to Black people. So we tend to be a lot less trusting. And I mean, even the movie, I can't remember the lady's name, but the movie that Oprah Winfrey did, where she played the woman who they took her blood sample and they came up with
Oh, and
this
they interviewed her kids, and that's I know
Henrietta
exactly.
Lacks. Was that it?
Yes.
Okay, praise the Lord. I'm about to say something live on air. I'm about to mess it up, but Henrietta Lacks. So it's like, and she
right.
still never was compensated. Her family was
Right.
compensated. This was done without permission.
Yes, it was
It was
called
done without consent.
The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks.
Yes, on Henrietta. So there was no informed consent. She was not a willing participant, and they didn't admit it. And they never compensated the family for it. So there's not a lot of confidence that this is something that people want to line up to do. And it's not just Black people that are concerned about it. There's a lot of anti-vaccine uh, movements and people that don't vaccinate their kids because they don't have faith that this is actually going to help and that it's going to be more harmful. Or on the conspiracy theory side, they're like, they're going to inject us with the chips and, all kinds of crazy stuff. So, so I'm with you, Rhonda.
Yeah. Because
the thing about
LaTonya, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, the thing about vaccines is because I see doctors on a regular basis, like, well, the vaccine will only be 50% effective. And I was like, huh? And he's like, just like the flu vaccine, it's not 100% effective. So, if they're being honest about a vaccine, they will absolutely never be able to say that this is going to prevent you from catching this disease.
Right.
They can't say it.
Yeah.
And our best, most used vaccines are just marginally, better. It's like, you got 51% and above. Okay, that's a good vaccine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because I'm not anti-vaccinations or anything like that.
Right.
But like I said, my concern about getting a vaccine, like especially for something like this so soon, when they haven't had a chance, to actually collect data on it or whatnot. Anyone who gets it is being a guinea pig, if you think about it, because that's how they're going to collect the data that they're going to need to know how to improve the vaccine or what vaccines really work that doesn't work. And they're only going to be able to collect that data off of the people that they initially vaccinate with it. So anyone who gets it right off the bat, you're basically part of clinical trials. But that's still going on though with any type of vaccinations and things that they do. So that's not anything new. But
So we've already kind of touched on the fact that the food supply chain has been disrupted, and so they're predicting now that there are going to be more food shortages in the long term. And like LaTonya was saying at the top of the show, we're already starting to see the shelves not completely return to the level of being stocked the way that they were before. As a matter of fact, I'm starting to see products that I've never seen before. And I'm like, okay, y'all are having to go to different suppliers, different distributors,
Yes.
you know, but that can only be sustained for so long until we're actually going to see food shortages. And I mean, even right now, because COVID-19 has touched so many different things, that in Africa and in the Middle East, they're having locust swarms. They've had locust swarms, you know, within the last few months. And normally, when these things come, they're able to fight it off, you know, with some level of effectiveness. But because COVID-19 has reduced the amount of people that can actually come and do this, and the supply chains of what is necessary to fight off the locust swarms, their crops have been practically obliterated. So you have food shortages that, like I said, may not necessarily be directly because of COVID-19, but because it has affected everything. You're seeing shortages across the board for a lot of different reasons. So, you know, these are things that are coming down the pipeline that we have to be aware of, and things that people are concerned about. Another topic that I want to address, which, you know, kind of gave me a pause for concern, is contact tracing. So now they're going to implement contact tracing through personal health, public health, public health administrators or whatever, PHAs. I can't remember the acronym. I'm struggling. Let's see.
Public Health and Administration. Food.
No, that ain't it. I'm tripping. I'll get the acronym together, but they're PHAs. And it's so funny because I kept saying this yesterday, and Xavier was like, "What is your problem?" I'm like, I don't know why I can't remember the acronym, but the acronym is PHA. Somebody look that up for me while I'm talking. But so through people, there are going to be people that work in public health. They're going to do contact tracing, and they're going to be hired. Texas is looking to hire 4 to 5,000 people to fill the role of and do the job of contact tracing. But what is really interesting and should be of concern is that they're going to implement technology to do contact tracing. So in countries like in Australia, countries like South Korea, and of course China, there have been many other countries that have already adopted the apps used for contact tracing. But now Google and Apple have joined together, and they are going to come up with technology to help with contact tracing through Bluetooth applications. And then, I'm not a tech person, but one of the things that they said is that they're going to implement this technology at the operating system level. And so I don't know that if through your Apple phone or through your Android system, which are the two major operating systems for our cell phones, that if you don't download the app or if you don't implement the app, I'm wondering if at the operation level or at the operating level of your system, will they just be able to do it regardless? So this is kind of a concern. So I think Alex may have the video that's ready and hopefully he'll be able to share the screen. But I want to play the video because the video can actually describe what this contact tracing is, how it's been implemented, and what are the implications and why people should be concerned. So if you have that video, then you can go ahead and share the screen and roll that, and then we can have a short discussion about that afterwards.
1,000 Texans have tested positive since March, and state leaders say they haven't been able to contact.
So if you have the BBC one, I feel like Roland Martin. Shout out to the Roland Martin show. He'd be like, no, not that one. Bring the other one up. Not that, this one.
It just says Public Health Administration, Pastor Jay. It doesn't say anything else. You were looking for those acronyms for that?
Yes, thank you, because I was struggling. I was really struggling. I don't know what my problem was, but let me see if I can't find it real quick.
Yeah, because searching on the World Wide Web is showing like PHA in Ireland, which stands for something else, public health, but a lot of PH something.
Okay, so let's see. Doggone it. Okay, let me see if I can't share my screen again this time. Okay. All right, so. Okay, here we go. For whatever reason now there's no audio. Now, I did this a million times.
That's what's happening. I've sat in so many meetings, you know, where people think they're prepared and then this technology just starts acting crazy. So, you know, this is kind of expected with everything going on.
Right, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, all right. Alex, were you able to pull it up? Because I got it, but for whatever reason, my audio is not cooperating. Share it with you again. Okay. Okay, no problem.
Yeah, Pastor Jay, it says they'll be relying on Bluetooth low energy wireless radio signals for contact tracing.
Yeah, that's a little disconcerting. I mean, because the obvious is that we already know, or most of us are already aware of the fact that our phones are used to track us, you know, the location sharing. And then also with Bluetooth, basically when you have your Bluetooth turned on or your NFC option turned on your phone, that your phone is constantly communicating with other people. It's not just so that you could connect to your Bluetooth devices or speakers, it's actually communicating with other people. And, you know, one of the things that we talked about, which we don't actually know how all of this works, but we just know that it does, is the fact that, you know, you could be having a conversation about shampoo, and then all of a sudden you go on Facebook or you look up and you got ads for shampoo, and I'd be like, hot dog, the Big Brother 1984.
I
Jesus,
told y'all
take the wheel.
My experience, and my biggest thing when I saw it was I had never even heard of the brand that a friend and I was talking about. So it could not have been in my search history. You know, a lot of people say, well, those ads come up because of things that you searched, you know, on your computer, that sort of thing. But no, I know I had never searched that brand because I had never heard of it. And as soon as I went on my phone, it was the first ad that came up. I said, okay, well, that was it.
Yep, there it is. Okay, now we got the video. All right.
There's been a lot of talk about China's high-tech fight against coronavirus. Robots delivering food in hospitals, facial recognition cameras taking people's temperatures, and drones enforcing lockdowns and quarantines. But what about the tech we can't see? China's sophisticated and controversial data surveillance system is used to track citizens on and offline. 健康码运用大数据监控后台大数据精密自控 And it's proving extremely effective during the pandemic. The mass surveillance network has taken the Communist Party decades to build. They've faced near constant criticism for it around the world. But as the world tries to get a grip on COVID-19, many countries are looking to the model for answers. Here's how they're doing it in South Korea.
They're using your phone to locate where you are, and then they'll send you an emergency alert if you're anywhere near where a confirmed coronavirus patient has been.
Singapore, Israel, Iran, Taiwan, and Russia have all adopted some or all of the Chinese methods to temporarily harness the power of data. More are expected to follow. So how does China's data surveillance system work, and how is it useful in a pandemic? It all starts with this, a national ID card. You need one to pretty much do anything in China. From buying a mobile phone to using any app, everything you do leaves a data trail linked back to your ID. In areas in lockdown, phone location data is being used to monitor movement and enforce curfews. If a patient is meant to be in quarantine, geolocation pings on their phone can alert authorities if they stray out of their homes. Phone location data is also being used to map exactly where that person visited in the 2 weeks before being diagnosed. A combination of human and automated computer analysis work out who they may have infected. If they went on a train and got too close to other commuters, a text message is sent out through one of the major apps, alerting those at risk. Every person is being assigned a coloured QR code depending on the risk they pose. Green, no risk. Orange, they've entered a potential virus hotspot. And red, if they've tested positive for the virus and could still be contagious. None of this cyber surveillance would be any good without the Chinese state's strict enforcement teams too. Police and volunteers have literally manned the exits of apartment blocks to keep places on lockdown.
我国内地无新增本土确诊和疑似病例。
But in countries where these data surveillance powers are being brought in to help deal with coronavirus, some people are worried about the long term.
My name is Adam Schwartz. I am a senior lawyer at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. There is a great concern that when government gets new powers in a crisis, government never gives those powers away even when the crisis ends. So, for example, in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, the United States created vast new surveillance powers. 19 years later, those powers are still very much in the hands of the U.S. government.
Adam and others also have questions about just how much of a difference this data surveillance can make and if it's worth it.
What we are basically saying to governments around the world is, before you unveil unleash a brand new mass surveillance power, it's necessary for governments to come forward and really public health professionals to come forward and show that these technologies would actually address the crisis.
Striking the delicate balance between privacy and security is an age-old problem for governments and the public. But perhaps never in history has the dilemma been more pressing and more life-threatening.
Okay. I was laughing the whole time that video was going on because I was looking at mainly your face, Rhonda, but I was just kind of looking at LaTonya's too. But y'all's facial expressions was like this is. So what do y'all think about that video?
It is just so much to be concerned about, to be, I don't know. Some of the things that they show, I was like, really? Like, it's so obvious, some of the things that are playing out in this that leads up to biblical prophecy, you know? And I know that's not what our conversation, that's not what this show is about. So I'm not gonna dive into that. But when you see things like that, it's like it's right here in our face now. Like, we couldn't even deny those things if, you really wanted to try to, have an argument about it or whatnot. But with the part that just really alarmed me was the whole ID, and they called it a national ID card. I mean, that could be similar to what's used as our social security number, or, our social security number is probably similar because that's also how, if the government wanted to, they could track us. If they saw, the different things that you're doing with your social security. But to have an ID and the type of technology to be able to scan it, to be able to track every place you go, if you step out of a certain area, they send you a text message telling you that you're that's mind-blowing to me. Having that much control over the population, that's mind-blowing, and that is scary.
Yeah, and that is the concern that people have had, that it's like, we know that China is the extreme example because they're a communist country, so everything is much more controlled, much more regulated. They have much fewer liberties and freedom. But Alex just gave me a message, and this is where I was leading to. So we know that China is the extreme, but people have been hinting at looking at China as an example of how they were able to flatten their curves so much more quickly. And so people are concerned about that. It's like, well, whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, China is communist. Of course they can control their people so much more than they can here in the United States. But now all of a sudden, their model is becoming more appealing. But just to blow your mind, you remember I was telling you about the real ID, that everyone now is being required by October of 2020 this year, that everyone in the United States is going to have a national ID as opposed to your state driver's license, and it's called the real ID. So when you go to renew your license, you're going to be suggested, it's really a requirement, but the suggestion is that you get the real ID, because if you don't, you won't be able to fly and you won't be able to enter government buildings. So that's really not a suggestion. It's really forcing you to comply with the real ID. The real ID, when they take your picture, it's not just a picture that goes away and it's on that ID. The real ID camera is a facial recognition camera that they take your picture with. So if you've renewed your driver's license recently, or if you're going to have to soon, you are going to be forced to get the real ID. It is a facial recognition camera, and your face will be entered into a global, not just national, database, that your face will be recognized when you go into government buildings and airports. And if there's cameras, surveillance cameras, your facial recognition is going to be identified. So we are already there. And as part of the 2030 agenda, which is that one of their goals for the 2030 global agenda is to be able to have everybody receive an ID, because they want everybody to receive services. Everybody's going to be able to have access to all the things they need. And the way to do that is to make sure that everybody has an ID. We're already there.
Yep.
So, but now it's being slowly introduced by way of this virus, that the technology happens to coincide and now be in place, that Apple and Google, which are two behemoths, giant corporations that are constantly intruding on our privacy, that they're going to use this now to figure out where you're at, who you've been in contact with. And so, like the guy Adam Schwartz says, once the government gets privileges to invade your privacy, and once they receive power, then they don't give it up. 9/11 is a perfect example. They took that as an opportunity to invade in people's privacy, to listen in to people, and people were willing to give up that privacy to feel safe and secure. If that means you're catching the terrorists, then I'll give up my privacy and my information. And the same thing is happening with this pandemic, that they're using it as an opportunity to continue to infringe upon people's privacy through the use of technology. So that is the contact tracing thing. It's one thing for a person to be making phone calls saying, have you been sick? Have you been tested? Who have you been around? Where have you been? That's one thing. But now the technology that does it automatically, and it is going to be the preferred method, that is a cause for concern. Brother Alex, how much time do we have left? None. Okay. So we are going to have part two. I mean, it was unrealistic to think that we could cover all the things that we've covered so far and be able to cover everything that we want to cover. So we're going to have a second installment where we're going to talk about the response of the church. And when I say the church, I'm not talking about the building that should be closed and you haven't been to, or you shouldn't have been to in the last 2 or 3 months. I'm talking about the church, the body of Christ, the called out ones, the ecclesia, the kodashim. I'm talking about God's people. What should be our response? What has been our response? And what should be our response moving forward? Because we don't want to give you all this information and bombard you with all this information without leaving you and taking you to a place where God can minister to you and help you through this crisis, and to also give you some practical, common sense information about how we should govern ourselves accordingly and act like we got some sense. So we love you. We thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, hit us up on our Facebook page, Commission Ministries, our email, which is cmchurchtx@gmail.com. You can visit our website, commissionministries.com. So there's numerous ways to contact us. So we love you for listening, and we hope that you'll tune in to part 2 of Listen Radio, the COVID-19 edition. We love you. God bless you. We're out.